Some personal remarks that this is my first trip, third trip to Poznan. First, I was invited by Piotr to deliver a lecture in his class, so all connected to Piotr. The second one was when I attended to his funeral to represent the international community, so to say. And this one, the third, the commemoration of his intellectual legacy. So I wanted to choose a topic which was very dear to him, namely the politics in art, not political art, politics in art, because he truly was, so to say, a political animal. And I have to tell that I will not be that cheerful as Alison, but rather gloomy. But I thought that this gloominess has to be put on the map as well. At least in this very moment, I can offer this gloominess. Okay. So, different peripheries have different relations to space and time. Eastern Europe, or you name it, East Central Europe as you like, is especially preoccupied with space, place, locality, that is, with geopolitics, while largely ignoring the question of time. Even the names and metaphors used for the theory of horizontal art history, offered by late Piotr Piotrowski, are spatial. Post-colonial theories oscillate between space and time, while the decolonial option is not really bothered by the notion of place, but focuses instead of time. Rolando Vázquez, who formulated the concept of the institution of politics of time, argues that chronology and imposition of modern time are at the heart of the modern colonial system of oppression, and therefore resistance against hegemonic globalization should question the universality of modern time. We might add that modernity not simply rejects the past, but the point is that it negates the past as an open realm of experience, and instead it historicizes and delegates it to museums. In a timeline, if modern Europe was established as the present, then the past was the other. Therefore, Vázquez fights against this temporal otherness, and as a way out, suggests to return to the past. The question raised by this presentation are whether the catchphrase of this cutting-edge theory of decoloniality, return to the past, can be applied to the post-socialist condition. Or is it heterogeneity of temporalities offered by the seductive theory of contemporaneity that the region gains an advantage from? And finally, if we shift from geopolitics to chronopolitics, what is out there for us? Well, before the temporal turn, as we might call the new attention towards time, in 1983, Johannes Fabian, an anthropologist, recognized, quote, that it was only possible for Western powers to aspire control over the rest of the globe's culture if they were characterized not only as spatially exotic, but also as temporally backward. Time's location, the place where time mattered, was in the West. Nicholas Mirzov connects the intersection of time with space to racial issues, arguing that white supremacy writes about race in terms of time. White races are advanced and civilized, while non-white race is designated as backward or barbaric. A dichotomy we also know quite well from the center, periphery, west-east binary. Contemporaneity, or as it was called, multiple temporalities or heterogeneity of temporalities, the collateral theory of globalization coined by Terry Smith, grew out of the frustration over the controversy that if the space of the world and art production is extended, it could not be the West alone where time mattered. So for now, there is a general critical consensus that artistic production was no longer motivated by its relation to time. However, the promise of happy togetherness to celebrate contemporaneity is also troubled with pitfalls. Keith Moxie, converging around, as he names it, visual time, calls our attention to some hidden traps of the new theory. The strategy, quote, which evades the lure of universal time, nevertheless fails to engage with the possibility that time possesses many dimensions and textures. The heterochronous trajectories traversed by different cultures are rejected in favor of a non-time that flattens and obliterates specificities of geographical and cultural location. As he concludes, a featureless contemporaneity registers difference in neither time nor culture. Thus, this theory does not seem to be the best fit for us. If so, let's get back to the question of temporal other. The question is, what is to be done with the decolonial option with regard to Eastern Europe? The presuppositions of the concepts are not that alien to the region. On one hand, the imposition of modern time is also a concern for us, as it relegated the peripheries of Europe into a secondary positions and into the past. On the other hand, though Eastern Europe has not been colonized in the strict meaning of the word, it has been under Soviet dominance for almost half a century. The main difference, however, is that after the collapse of the Soviet satellite system, the crucial dilemma was which past to return to and which past to be erased. In this regard, even the Eastist time was different. On top of that, the past that we are to return to was often designated by the new nationalist state power. Consequently, the decolonial catchphrase of returning to the past was not a theoretical, not a rhetorical question, but was the political and cultural reality in the region. Moving back in time, Eastern Europe has always had its own obsession with time and with the past. Larionov and Goncharova's Rayonist and Futurist Manifesto, written in 1913, has the slogan, "The future is behind us," which rejected the race against time in the tumultuous period of style and isms in Paris. In this concept, future and past are not rigid and hierarchical concepts, but could be easily reversed, proposing to turn to the past for inspiration. Leaders of various authoritarian systems in the past and in the present often imagine themselves as artists able to transform space on a large scale and also to change trajectory of time. Stalin's pet project, the Palace of Soviets, was the symbol of proletarian architecture. As Susan Buckmore claims, quote, "The example of Soviet sublime is a fantasy object that must be imagined into existence on gigantic scale. The idea of sublime, one of overcoming the physical limits of collective workers who will build it. The latter are required to sacrifice themselves as sensory beings in order to build a new world for the proletarian masses. In proportion as their own physical selves are diminished, the collective is enhanced in symbolic forms." In this account, the notion of sublime is introduced, but not in its original meaning, which is connected to some extraordinary, untamed natural landscape. It resonates rather on a wider definition to be found, for example, in Edward Burke's account, who extended the notion to everything earthly, even human construction. In his typology, huge proportion, grand scale, panoramic view, the dramatic verticality also applies to the category of sublime. As for Poland, a gesture for the hosts, the still standing symbol of Warsaw from the socialist time, Palace of Culture and Science, also qualifies for being a sublime experience due to its huge size and its vertically dramatic effect, from which the so-called palace complex, an obsession with the powerful phallic construction, could stem. So much so that the local population was and still is unable to stay neutral about it, according to the research of Mikhail Muravsky. Even in the classical theories of sublime, terror experienced by the beholder is also an important effect. Accordingly, in the chapter named Imperial Sublime, Katharina Clark, in her book Moscow, the Fourth Rome, extends the notion of sublime to time and to a whole period to the 30s, the darkest time of the Great Purchase, stating that, quote, the appropriation of sublime imagery by the Soviet rhetoric of the late 30s was a move to make the Soviet reality adequate to the terror. As for the explanation, she claims that in Stalinist Russia, the sublime was very functional as a source of narrative strategies for effectively naturalizing Stalinist power. Nevertheless, sublime, in its original setting, through dramatic landscape, nurtured also national identity as the formation of the concept coincided with the birth of the nation. I would argue that sublime, connected to urban design and also to time, could be put in the service of pulling together the nation even today. In this regard, not just extreme verticality, but extreme horizontality, and also focusing on the past instead of the future, might be recognized as sublime element. Based on this concept, I propose to consider Kossuth Square in Budapest, Hungary, as an example of post-socialist nationalist sublime, which is focused more on time than space. In order to uncover the drive behind the contemporary sublime, let's get back to Mirzov's essay on the clock of the world, in which he argues that in revolutionary time, actors experience the future in real time. I would argue that in reactionary time, actors experience the past in real time. He elaborates his argument. He elaborates his arguments around his thesis, Black Lives Matter, in which the Haitian Revolution is exemplary, as it fulfilled the ethical demand of victory over death, social death, from which the black slaves were suffering, over the non-life of living. In his interpretation, the opening statement of the 1904 Constitution, slavery is forever abolished, mixes past, present, and future to end social death. As he claims, this clause undid colonialism and sought to foreclose any future possibility of white supremacy, neocolonialism, and segregation to simply be present in decolonial space, and also rewriting blackness as revolutionary affiliation. As for the timely fantasy of the Hungarian rightist regime, dreaming itself back to the interwar period, it undid socialism. That is, it literally erased the past. The visible traces of the past of a whole generation was diminished, and the imagined national past was enhanced in symbolic politics. The square in recent form offers a time travel back to the mid-19th century in a literal meaning, as its 1944 spectacle has been recently meticulously reconstructed, erasing its overall image of the socialist time, as if communism never happened. This imagination is in line with the rhetoric that Hungarian sovereignty was lost during the two consecutive occupations of the country, first by the Nazis and then by the Soviets. According to Clark, most theoreticians define sublime in connection to an experience of power. In our case, it is not just symbolically, but also physically connected to the reigning regime, as the square is in front of the Hungarian parliament. This power demonstration is directed at the nation whose national horizon is symbolically expanded, also a sublime element, to the mythic land, Transylvania, through the secular flag hanging in the place of the EU flag, together with the Hungarian national one on the building. The sublime, also functional here. It intends to naturalize the nationalist power. Although there is no direct connection between the statues of Kossuth Square and the Treaty of Trianon, as they are not explicitly revisionist statues, but obviously there is a connection in the eyes of the beholders, who are well aware that the Count István Tisza was an adamant proponent of Hungarian supremacy. His statue is frequently honored with the wreath of the form of Greater Hungary. Thus, in this post-socialist, nationalist sublime, as I would name it, distress, pain, and especially grief, whether natural or artificially generated, is operational as a sublime component based on Burke's typology, who claims, quote, "The person who grieves suffers his passion to grow upon him. He indulges it, he loves it. Grief should be willingly endured. Though far from a simply pleasing sensation, it is the nature of grief to keep its object perpetually in its eye." This corresponds with the phenomenon that many nations elevate symbols signifying their defeat to the center of their national mythology. The symbolic moments of national subjugation are pervasive in those nations' own perception of the history. According to Emil Durkheim, the nation acts as a secular substitute to religion in modern age. If so, then sacrifice, which is so fundamental to religion, must also exist in the nation. Followers of Durkheim have suggested that not culture, not language, not ethnicity or even territory, as it has been generally conceived, serve as the real cement of the nation, but the shared memory of blood sacrifice. The function of sacrifice and symbols of defeat is that they can create a connection with the past and provide a sense of historical injustice or grievance around which the community can be mobilized, successfully side-tracking it from real existing problems in the present. Needless to say, that recurring future loss and fantasy of upcoming defeat or even the death of the nation serves the same function as we can see in the ongoing campaign against migrants. In Mirzov's argumentation, it was the Haitian Revolution that made it possible to be in present regardless of past histories, while the pervasive subtext of Stodyel's centennial commemoration of 1917 Russian Revolution, alluding to the Haitian Revolution with its zombie choreography, could be seen as the problematization of the uneven assessment of the French, Haitian, and Russian Revolution in the historical discourse. The recent Hungarian regime is about to erase all revolution from the local discourse, especially the 1990 Hungarian Soviet Revolution, at the onset of its centennial anniversary, and denunciate contemporary artworks that address the issue. In Kassák Museum, which dedicated an exhibition to the topic, the curator, the artist, the writers of the catalogue were personally harassed, politically attacked, and denounced in an extreme right-wing forum, despite the neutral, distant, scholarly attitude and analytic nature of the exhibition. The attack actually was part of the systematic attack on the last standing bastions of liberal culture. The artist looks back from the future to the 1990 Hungarian Revolution in his solo show, focusing on just one day of the 133-day-long dictatorship, the May 1st celebration. Photographs on the wall served as a referential point to objects made by the artist. The pieces reflect on the symbolic act of removing privileges and redistribution resources. For example, allowing to use bridges and the city park free of charge for everybody. They evoke the procedure of museologization, a purification process in which objects lose all their political intentions and potentials and are appreciated as sacred and pure art above politics and everyday life. They also demonstrate, however, unintentionally, how easy it is to pull them back and use them for political manipulation if needed. The other contemporary reflection on the recent cultural ecosystem is Imre Gábor's life-size black and white paper prints. The prints are dystopic evocations of what remains from the visual culture of the present for the future. Be they masterpieces of high art or iconic images of popular culture, among them, the red hammer wielding man, the symbol of the revolution made by Mihály Bíró. Thank you. Yeah, this one, on the right side. The person in charge of the May Day decoration in 1919. All figures are wearing masks, which along with the equal size, black color and skeletal character contribute to the uniformization and make them a frightening army of ghosts of the culture of the past. No clue is given as to whether the figures are foreseeing the future and are wearing masks in order to survive a catastrophe to come, or whether they have already burnt into ashes. The two artistic projects are diverse interpretations of the present as seen from the future. However, both of them, even if unintentionally, diagnose the present time travel into the past from the perspective of the future. And finally, I wish to provide a few examples from both ends of the spectrum of how difficult it is to adjust decolonial thinking and especially its slogan of returning to the past into another periphery, Eastern Europe, or quite the contrary, of how easy it is to return to the distant past and jump over and erase the recent past driven by political interest. Thank you.